Hi, I'm Shelby, and I'm going to talk about pursuing de-radicalization without dehumanizing people. I am a person who left a very high control, extreme fundamentalist environment, religious environment, and I still have maintained a lot of the relationships I had then. They look a lot different now, but as someone who has, so to speak, escaped the matrix and then peered back into it from the outside, I can now see how that environment is hurting people that I care about in the same way that it hurt me. For example, there are certain religious doctrines that I think are harmful. That comes from both my experience, my anecdotal experience, and an understanding of empirical research. So, since I care about these people, I feel an urge to de radicalize them. And I'm using that term loosely, but all I mean is I want to help them escape. And shaking them and just yelling in their face like you're in a cult, it ain't gonna work. There's too much inoculation that is baked into the system against that sort of thing. There are all sorts of things I could say to a person in a high control environment that would immediately throw up 50 walls, keeping them from thinking about what I'm saying in any real sense. So because of that, I've tried to think of ways to, with empathy, help them see what's being done to them. But something that people in my position I think really need to avoid is dehumanizing those people and turning them into a project for me to fix. It takes away the dynamic of who they are as a person with multifaceted experience, with very deep, real emotions. And I don't want to do that because I wouldn't want to be turned into a project for them to recruit back into the fold, to save. Because I want to be respected. I also struggle with the idea that if I were to be successful in helping these people who I care very, very deeply about escape that environment and they lose a lot of the things that environment gives them, the good things like community. Let's say that they're kicked out of their community. At the end of the day, if it's because I was having conversations with them and those conversations led to them changing their position and seeing that high control environment for what it is, I will probably feel a measure of guilt. And that guilt is going to be relative to how hard things get for them once they leave the community. I spoke about this in my last video, but losing faith, leaving your what you've known your whole life, your high, even if it's a high control environment, is extremely difficult. And nihilism can just flood in and take over. And to watch someone go through what I went through with that, I have a friend who has based his entire life on that high control community. His income, his marriage, his relationships to his kids, his relationships to his all his friends, his community, everything is completely dependent on him believing that it's all true. So I struggle. I very deeply want to talk to them about these things that I'm extremely passionate about, but people don't leave systems that work for them. And if the system is working for my friend, which it clearly is because he's happy, who am I to say to him like, "Hey, this thing you believe, like there's absolutely no data to suggest that it's true." But at the same time, my friend's beliefs hurt other people, like marginalized communities in my country. So I just have this tension. And at the end of the day, I usually lean towards let's have these deep, heavy conversations if you're willing. But that's always in the back of my mind. If I did contribute to my friend's deconstruction, deconversion, and let's say his life fell apart. Marriage implodes, relationship with his kids changes, loses his community, quits his job because he feels like he's part of something he doesn't believe in anymore. Let's say he plummets and self harms. How am I going to feel um, for having been responsible for his life collapsing? I don't really know how to approach that, but at the same time, I value having good reasons for believing things so deeply. I value raising children without harmful doctrine, without putting really sick ideas into their mind during critical developmental periods. So, all that being said, the way I approach these conversations and these relationships I have with my old community members is to honestly reverse something I was taught within that community, which is that I had to be a light to the rest of the darkness of the world. I had to just live and exist in such a way that anybody looking at me can just see the glory and power of Jesus Christ. And as a non believer now, I represent something that the people in my old community were supposed to be afraid of. Outside of my community, there was no morals, it was full of demonic presence. We were built to be afraid of people like who I am right now. So it's my job to show how that is a lie to the people still in that community, to show that I'm happy, I care about people, I try to make the world better, I live morally, whatever that means, and I'm happy. I represent a mirror to them of what their life could look like. And if I'm, if I'm stepping into that role of angry atheist, just like trying to be like a mini Matt Dillahunty or Christopher Hitchens or any of those guys, it's fulfilling the lie that was told to them about the outside world. It's completely counterproductive to my goals as somebody who wants to help them escape. The approach, I think, always needs to be grounded in empathy for their situation because they are victims of their community. They're victims of the ideas that were imposed upon them, as for most of them, from as early as they can remember. The research that's out there about how to change people's minds, about how to start a movement, all of it shows that gentle activism is far more effective. So if you really care about changing minds, you can't make it about you. You can't make it I'm going to win this argument. I'm going to look like I'm smart and I'm correct about this. You have to get on their level with empathy, understand their situation, and help gently guide them through the process of seeing how the world that they're in is hurting them and other people. And that can be tough because the ego steps in and we want to be right and we want people to acknowledge that we're right and they're wrong when we think that's the case. But you have to set all that aside. If you care about the person in that cult, it doesn't matter that you're right or you have the answers. What matters is they're stuck. You have to set an example for what it's like to live outside of the cult, so it's not so scary to their brains, or else their brains are never going to let go. So I think that every component of dedication to any ideology, every single component can be represented as like a protective layer or a shield against outside conflicting information that contradicts that ideology. So, I have a list here of things that could count as one of these protective layers. I'm just going to read them out. The amount of time that you've held the ideology. Let's say you've believed this since as long as you can remember, before you can remember, in a lot of cases. So with that, how early in your development it was accepted by your mind, and thus how deep the neurobiological channels have been dug in your brain. The extent to which it informs your decision making, your identity, or brings meaning to your life. the attachments you've made between people you admire or love and the ideology itself. Like if you look up to a lot of people who hold the same ideology, that's a layer. If your profession and thus you and your family's source of income and physical well being is attached to it, that's another. If your existential security depends on it, and that's a big one for high control environments because they give you amazing existential gifts, answers to really important deep questions like what's the meaning of life? Here you go. Here's a little nice gift wrap box. What happens when we die? Here you go. Here's a nice little gift wrap box. How did we all get here? Here you go. And that is just so soothing that that's a thick layer. Like the brain, it's gonna take a lot to get through that to the inner self, the little man. If your relationships, especially your closest relationships, but also let's just say your community at large, is dependent on that ideology, it's another. And with that, if your sense of social security and support is dependent on it, let's say you have social safety nets that you can fall back on because of the support of your high control environment community. Every single one of those, I think, represents like a chink in the armor of your brain. And it's there because experiencing dissonance between what you believe and data that contradicts it is really, really disconcerting. It's very stressful to the brain. That dissonance can be dealt with in two ways. And the path of least resistance is to lean on thought terminating cliches, to look to other people who hold the same ideology because that reinforces in our mind that, well, if all these people believe it, then I'm good. I'm justified in believing it. Like they can't all be wrong, right? That's the easy thing to do. What's really hard is setting everything I just set aside, all that support, all that security, and leaving and escaping it. Because the consequences of that can be extremely stressful and can represent real danger to you. If your income and your well-being is attached to it, then it's going to be pretty tough for your brain to be like, okay, fine, we can let go. So in the interest of de-radicalization, I think we have to consider all these things that make it really, really psychologically frightening to confront reality. And we can only see what our brains allow us to see at the end of the day. So I think that's how we can balance de-radicalization without dehumanizing. You consider their lived experience, you consider what their environment does for them, why they're in it, why the system works for them. You approach all of that with empathy, and you live as an example for what their life could look like. It doesn't have to be that scary. It doesn't have to be the lie that they've been told it's going to be. So I just want to encourage anybody who has left a high control environment and is now struggling with the fact that people they care about are still in that environment. That can be really hard, especially if it's family. You know, there's going to be tension there, and I feel for that if you're going through that, and it's really hard and it sucks. But we just have to do our best from the outside, as I've been saying, and it's possible. If you're going through something similar, let me know in the comments. I will talk to you, and I want to contribute to a community of people on the outside struggling with the various challenges that pop up for people like us. So, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.